React has changed the way that we write front-end code, and this React Challenges course will help you practice your React skills. Each video is a self-contained challenge. I'll introduce the problem, show you what the final app should look like, and then you'll implement the solution. After, we'll talk through one possible solution together, though there are many possible solutions to all of the problems. Each challenge is completely independent, so you can skip around and solve them in any order that you want. You can solve each challenge with just React. No need for other libraries. I've started a Create React app project that we'll be using for each challenge. In React, you'll often need to pass data from one component to another and create multiple instances of a component with different information displayed in each instance. In this coding challenge, you'll be building a color renderer, which will display color swatches on a user interface. There's already a directory there set up for you called 01 color renderer that has the starter code. There are two components pre-built, color and color renderer, and these are in separate files. There's also an array of colors with hex codes and names. You can add to that or change the colors if you want to. It's just a starter. Your job is to update the color renderer component that's in the starter code to display one instance of the color component for each color. Use props in React to render a different color on the screen for each color in the array. This is what your final application should look like when you're done. Let's pause here and I'll let you solve the challenge. Come back when you're finished and we'll chat through a solution. The first thing that I need to do is map through the array of colors. For each color, I'm going to render an instance of the color component. Each color component will need a unique key. The color child component receives two props, hex and name. I need to pass that to each instance as well. Okay, if I jump back to the browser, you'll see this in action. This is just one way to solve this challenge. If you solved it differently, share your results in the comments below. An increasingly common feature on a website is having a dark mode and a light mode, or maybe even a pink mode. In this challenge, you'll be implementing a component that allows you to change from light to dark mode and back again. There's already a directory set up for you, 02 dark mode, and it has some starter code there for you. There's also a CSS class dark mode in the index.css file that, when added to an element, changes its background color to dark gray. The div with the class name page takes up the whole screen. Add the dark mode class to this element. Your challenge is that when the button with the class name dark mode button is clicked, the page should be displayed in dark mode. When the button with the class name light mode button is clicked, the page should be displayed without dark mode. The div with the class page already takes up the whole screen, so you can just add the dark mode class to that. When you're done, your application should work like this. Go ahead and pause this video and work on this challenge. Then come back and we'll go over a possible solution together. Welcome back. The first thing that I'm going to do is create a Boolean flag in state. This will store whether or not the user is currently in dark mode. Note, my text editor automatically imported use state, but if yours didn't, you'll need to make sure to import that. We'll set this state to false by default so that the page will be in light mode when the page loads. I'm going to add on-click handlers to both buttons. Inside of the dark mode button, I'll pass a callback function to the dark mode button that sets the dark mode flag to true. Finally, I'll update the class name on the page div to add the dark mode class if dark mode is set to true. I'll use string templating here. And so if dark mode is set to true, then I'll return the class dark mode. And now you can see in my browser that if I click the dark mode button, my page changes to dark mode, and the inverse for the light mode button. This is just one of many possible solutions, so if you did something different, I'd love if you could share yours in the comments. A very common task that developers need to perform is to make sure that a form validates, meaning that the user has inputted correct information that fits certain conditions into a form. In this challenge, you'll be validating a user signup form once that user submits that form. There is a directory already created for you, 03 form validator, that has starter code in it. There's a React form created for you with 3 fields: email, password, and password confirm. The state management logic is there for you as well. When the form is submitted, you'll validate that the user's information fits the following criteria. The email, password, and password confirmation fields are all filled in. The email field must have exactly 1 @ in it. The password must have 8 or more characters in it. The password and the password confirmation field must be the same. And if any of these conditions aren't met, you should display an error message. If they are all met, instead display a success message. If the user fits all of the criteria, the user interface should say something like user created. If instead they don't meet validation, they should get the error messages displayed on the page. Now we'll go ahead and pause, work through the challenge, and then come back. We'll go over the solution together. Welcome back. The first thing that I'm going to do is create a function that fires when the form is submitted. So I'll add an odd submit event to the form and call it handle submit. I'm going to prevent the default behavior of a form, which is to refresh the page. I'm going to create an array which will store all of the error messages if there are any. The first thing that I'll check for is if all of the fields exist. If one or more of these do not exist, I'll add the error message, all fields must be filled in. Now I'm going to perform a filter on the email field to make sure that the number of @ is exactly 1. I'll use the spread operator to add each character in email to an array. Then I'm going to run the filter higher order function on that. I will filter the characters to make sure that only ones with @ are left in that array. Then I'm going to check the length of that array and see if it's equal to 1. If it's not, then I'll push that error to that errors array. Now we're going to check to see if the length of the password is greater than or equal to 8. So if the password is shorter than 8 characters long, we'll do errors.push with password must be 8 characters or longer. Now we'll need to make sure that the password and password confirm are equal to each other. The error for that will be passwords must match. Now I'm going to return that errors array. I'll set the errors to a variable. Then I'm going to set a state field that has a message, whether that be that the user was successful or those errors. I'll set that to an empty string by default. Then I'll run that set errors function, and if there are any errors, then I'm going to join that errors array. Otherwise, I'll display user created. Now I'll use that set message function that use state returned, and I'll check to see if the errors array has any errors. If it does, I'll set the message with errors.join. And I'll put a comment, rephrase, and I'll put a comment and a space in between them. If there's no error, I'm just going to do user created. Now I'm going to display the message on the screen. Now if we go back to the browser, we can test out our user interface. In a real-life application, you'd probably want to check a lot more conditions, and if you want more practice, it would be a great exercise to go ahead and try to add more, such as the email validation or another form field. There are many other ways to solve this problem, so if you did something differently, please share in the comments. Many times you'll want to display dynamic data in your application. And most times an API is used to communicate with your data. In this challenge, we're going to use a dog picture API to display dog images on our React app. Some notes before you begin: there is a directory 04 dog pics that has starter code in it. There's an image of a dog and a button with a dog emoji on it. And there's a link to an API and a comment in the code, which you can use to fetch a random dog picture. You'll use the dog.ceo API to fetch a random dog image and display that image on a page load instead of the hard-coded image displayed now. When the dog button is clicked, fetch a new dog image and render it on the user interface instead. When you're done, your application should look something like this. A random dog is loaded on page load, then you can click the button to see a new dog. I'll pause here and let you complete the challenge. Come back and we'll talk about the solution once you're done. Welcome back. The first thing that I'm going to do is create a use effect. Use effect is a React hook that runs at multiple points in a React component's lifecycle. A use effect will run when the component mounts and whenever state is updated. You can pass an array to the use effect in order to decide when it reruns. So with an empty array, it's only going to run on that initial mount instead of whenever state updates. But I could pass different state variables into this array and make it so that the use effect reruns when any of those are changed. If you forget the secondary array, you can trigger basically an infinite loop, so make sure to include that. Now, I want to create a function that fetches a dog picture. This will be an asynchronous function. And I'm going to use the built-in function fetch in order to fetch data from an API. I'm going to use the provided API. And if I go to that URL, it'll give me more information about the API. And it looks like the URL that I want to use is this API breeds image random. I'll copy that and paste it into my code. Once I get the response back from the API, I'll convert it to JSON. Then the API will return a message, so I'll return that dog.message. So I'm going to use the useState hook to initialize state for this component. Note that I've imported the useEffect and useState hooks from React. Now I'm going to run that getDogPic function, and then I'll chain a .then on there so that after that's done running, I can update the state with that dog picture. So I'll run the setDogPic function with that picture. Then I'll set the image source to be the dog picture from the API instead of the hard-coded one. Now I'll need to make this button work. So I'll add an onClick event. I'll await the getDogPicture function to be called, and then update the dogpic in state to match that new dog picture. Now, if I go back to the browser and refresh, you'll see that a very cute dog loads in, and the same thing happens whenever I click that button. There are other ways to solve this challenge, so if your solution is different but still works, that's totally fine. In this challenge, you'll be building a scorekeeping application, which will test your ability to run effects when state is updated. You'll be using local storage to store your data, and it allows you to store that data directly in the browser. Local storage allows you to store data in key value pairs, similar to an object. So to get an item out of local storage, you can run localstorage.getItem with the key. You can add data to local storage by using localstorage.setItem with the key and the value. There's a directory set up for you, 05 Scorekeeper, that has starter code. There's also a starter user interface, which displays a score that can be increased or decreased. Your job is to use local storage to store the score so that it persists when you come back to the page. You should be able to refresh the page and still see the score from the previous render. Here's how the application should work when you're finished. I can reload the page and my score still persists. Pause here and go ahead and write the code to solve this challenge, then come back and we'll talk through the solution together. In this challenge, we'll practice adding and removing effects within React. We'll be adding and removing event listeners from the entire page or the window object to test our knowledge. There's a directory already created for you, 06 add window event, that has starter code in it. There's a button that toggles mounting of a child component window event. Your job is that window event component is active. Add an event listener to the window that triggers an alert if the user double clicks on the page. Make sure to remove the window event when the component is toggled off. When you're done, the application should work like this. If I go to the page and double click, nothing happens. But if I toggle the window event on and I double click, then I get an alert. I toggle off and I no longer have that event. I'll pause here and let you work on the code to implement this, then come back and we'll go over the solution together. Welcome back. First, I'm going to add a useEffect. I'll pass an empty array to it. I'm going to import the useEffect from React. Within the useEffect, I'm going to create a function called doubleClick. and it's going to trigger an alert. I'll just say something like mouse pressed. Then I'm going to add an event listener to the window. And I'll listen for the double click event. When somebody double clicks, I'm going to trigger that double click function. Now I need to make sure to clean this up when I unmount the window event component. We can do this by returning a function from the use effect. So I'll do window.remove event listener, double click, and double click. Now, if I go back to the browser, I can test this out. My event is active, but it's no longer there once I remove it. There are many ways to solve this challenge, so if you did something different, please show me your results in the comments below. In this challenge, we'll be practicing working with multiple components and lifting up state. We're going to build a color picking app which sets the background of the page to a color of the user's choosing. There's a directory pre-created for you, 07 color picker, that has starter code. This code is very similar to the code from challenge 1, so don't be alarmed by that. It just renders colors on a page. There is a color picker component and a color component. Your challenge is to implement the logic so that when you click on color, it changes the background of the whole page to also match that color. Make sure to use the color subcomponent that's written for you already, and also keep the background color in the parent color picker component. When you're done, this is how your application should work. I should be able to click a color, and the background of the page should match that color. I'll pause here and let you complete the challenge. Come back when you're done and we'll talk through the answer. Welcome back. We're going to implement a common pattern in React called lifting state. What that means is moving state up to the top level component that needs that data, and then if we need to, pass a function to update that state to the child components. So what we're going to do is pass the set background color down to the color component as a prop. Now I'll go down to the color.js component. I'll make sure to accept that set background color prop. And then on click, I'm going to set the background color to the hex code. Now, if I go to the browser, I can click on my different colors and my background color matches. My application works the way that I want to. Building out games is a great way to test our logic skills. In this case, we're going to be building an interactive pixel art drawing app. We'll need to share data between multiple components in order to implement this game. We're going to be using React Context in order to implement our solution. React Context allows you to more easily share data between components. So you'll find in complex applications, you'll need to pass a prop down multiple layers. Context allows you to simplify this logic. There is a directory set up for you already, 08 pixel art, that has starter code. There are 4 React components written for you that render a grid and colors. When a color is clicked, that color should become the current drawing color. Then when one of the grid squares is clicked, it should be colored in with the drawing color. Use React Context to share state between your components. When your application is done, it should look something like this. You should be able to click a color, and then click a pixel and color it in with that color. I'm going to pause here and let you solve this challenge. Then we'll come back and talk through a possible solution. Welcome back. The first thing that I'm going to need to do is implement context. So I'm going to create a variable color context. I'll import create context from React. My text editor did it automatically, but you may need to do so manually. I'll pass an object to create context. The two things that I'm going to need to pass to it for my application are color, which I'll set to light gray to start out with. And then a function to update color. Right now, that'll be a function that does nothing. Now I'm going to scroll down to the pixel art function. This is the top level component for my pixel art drawing app. I'm going to set up state within this component. And again, I'm going to initialize with light gray. Now I'm going to take the color context provider and pass it the values color and set color. This won't change the color because it's light gray in both places. However, the set color function will be now set to the function to update state instead of that empty function that I created previously. I'll wrap my other components within this provider. Now we're going to need to use context in some of our other components. I'm going to go up to my color picker component. And within this component, I'm going to have to set the color. So I'll get the set color from my context. Again, I'll need to import use context from React. When my button is clicked, I'm going to set my color to the color of the button. Now, whenever I click one of those colors, my current drawing color will update with that color. Now I'm going to go down to my pixel component, which is a subcomponent of my pixels component. Notice that I don't need to pass a color prop from my pixels component to my pixel component in order to get access to my data. I'm going to destructure the color from my context. Each pixel is going to have its own state, and that's going to be its current background color. Right now, that's hard-coded to light gray, but if it's clicked on, it should change to the current drawing color, which we're accessing from React context. We don't want our pixel to keep changing colors as we change the drawing color either. So again, these pixels will initialize as light gray. So I'll set my default state to that. Instead of having the hard-coded light gray here, I'm going to change this to pixel color. I'll now add an on click to my pixel. So whenever my pixel is clicked, my pixel is updated to the current drawing color. Now, if I go to my browser, I can click and choose a drawing color and then also color my pixels. There are many ways to solve this challenge, so if your way was different, please share in the comments. In this challenge, we're going to build a very simplified version of a calculator that allows you to perform addition and subtraction on two numbers in order to practice using the useReducer hook. So sometimes state becomes really complicated in React, and there are multiple mutations that you'll need to implement for your data. The useReducer helps to simplify this by moving state management outside of your component. There's a directory set up for you already, 09 Simple Calculator, that has starter code. There's a limited calculator user interface pre-built where you can choose two numbers and take an action on them. Your challenge is to implement the logic so that two numbers can be selected. You'll also implement the logic to add these two selected numbers together, same for subtraction, and a clear function which will reset both of these numbers to 0 as well as the result. Make sure that you're using the useReducer hook to store and modify your data. When you're done, your application should work something like this. I can select two numbers and then perform an action on them. I'll pause here and let you solve this challenge. Then come back and we'll go over the solution together. Welcome back. The first thing that I'm going to need to do is populate the initial state object. I'm going to add three values to it: num1, which is 0 by default, num2, which is also 0 by default, and result, which I'm going to set to no result yet. And then within my simple calculator component, I'm going to use the useReducer hook in order to initialize a reducer. I'll pass to it my reducer function in my initial state. You'll also note that I needed to import the useReducer from React. I need to now implement my first action. So if I go into my button, I'm going to implement an onClick function. When a user clicks on this button, I'm going to use the dispatch function, and I'll pass in the action type, which is going to be set num1. I'll also pass in my number. Then I'm going to go up to my reducer and implement the logic for this action. So if my action type is set number1, then I'm going to return a copy of my current state, but num1 will be set to my action.number that I'm passing in this object here. The logic for my second number is going to be basically the same. I just need to change the number to 2. Now I need to implement my mathematical actions. So when I click on my add button, I'm going to dispatch the add action. Now, if I go back up to my reducer, I'm going to implement this logic. I'll again copy my state, but this time I'll set the result to state num1 plus state num2. Subtract will be basically the same. I'm just going to change this plus to a minus. For my clear button, my action will just return my initial state. So I'll go back to this object here. Now I'll make sure to display my result on the page. Now, if I go back to my browser, I can test out my app. 6, 4 plus should be 10. Now we have a very simple calculator that's working as expected. There are so many possible solutions for this challenge, so if yours is different, please share it in the comments. In this challenge, we're going to focus an input element upon page load in order to practice using refs in React. Within React, we'd normally just interact with the virtual DOM, but sometimes we'll need to interact with the actual DOM as well, and in order to do so, you can use refs. There's a directory created for you, 10 focus input, that has starter code in it. There's an input created for you on the page, and your job is to, upon page load, focus the input. You can see that when I load this page, my input is focused. I'll pause here, and you can solve this challenge. Come back when you're done, and we'll go through the answer together. Welcome back. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to initialize a ref. Note that I imported useRef from React. Now I'm going to add that ref to the input. Finally, I'll implement a use effect so that we can focus it upon page rephrase, upon the component mounting. I'll do focused input.current.focus. Now our app works as desired. When the page loads, our input is focused by default. In this challenge, you'll really be testing your React and JavaScript logic skills. You'll be building out a shopping cart that you can add items to, as well as totaling up the price of the items in the cart. There's a directory pre-built for you, 11 shopping cart, that has some starter code. And there's a UI pre-built with items listed on the left and a cart implemented on the right. You'll implement the add to cart logic first, where if you click the add to cart button, it adds an item to the cart. You'll also implement the plus and minus buttons so that you can add or remove items from the cart. Also, make sure to implement the total sum at the bottom of the page. When you're done, your application should work something like this, where you can add an item to the cart, increment or decrement the number of items in there. I'll pause here and let you implement the code for this challenge. Come back when you're finished and we'll go over the solution together. Welcome back. The first thing that I'm going to do is, instead of having a card-coded array for my cart, I'm going to swap this out for state. This state will be an empty array to start off. Now I'm going to make it so that when you click this add to cart button, it actually does something. So I'll add an on-click event. I'll pass the current item as well. Now I'll write that add to cart function. The first thing that I'm going to do is create a copy of the cart. Then I want to make sure that the item is not actually in the cart yet. So I'm going to try to find the item in the cart. So if the name of the item matches the name of the item in the cart, then I'm just going to want to increment the quantity of the item in the cart. Then I'll update the cart in state. Now, if the item's not in the cart yet, then I'm going to just add that item to the cart. So setCart will take a callback function with the previous cart and will return a copy of that previous cart plus a copy of the item that we wanted to add and a quantity, which will be 1 to start out. So now we've done the add to cart logic. Now I'm going to need to do the increase and the decrease buttons. So the plus and minus buttons on each item. I'll do the plus button first because it'll be slightly simpler. So I'm going to create an increase function and pass the item's name to it. Again, I'm going to create a copy of the cart. And then I'm going to try to find the item in the cart. I'll increase the item's quantity. And then set the cart with that cart copy. Okay, let's do the decrease function. Part of this logic will be the same minus a minus equal 1, but if our item quantity is going to be 0 or below, we just want to remove the item from the cart instead. So we'll add a conditional here. And only if the item's quantity is over 1 do we want to just decrement the quantity. Otherwise, we want to filter that item from the cart. Also, change the const to a let. We're now changing the value of cart copy so it can no longer be a constant. Now we'll add that on-click listener to our minus button. Now, due to floating point math, I'm going to round this to 2 decimal places. If you need this to be really precise, you'd probably want to just use integers instead of floats, but this isn't a real shopping cart, so I'm fine. Now I'm going to update the total, so if I go down to this total display, I'm going to run cart.reduce. And reduce takes a callback function with 2 arguments, an accumulator and the current item in the array. I'm going to return the accumulator plus i.quantity plus i.price. And then I need to provide the initial value of the accumulator, which I'll set to 0. And again, I need to round this total. Also, change the const to a let. We're now changing the value of cart copy so it can no longer be a constant. Now, if I go to the browser, I can add items to the cart, remove them, and my subtotal will increase or decrease appropriately. If you solved this differently, I'd love to see your solution in the comments. There are so many ways to solve this one.